Welcome, everybody. My name is Alexandre Alaphilippe. We are going to start this webinar in a few seconds. Just to mention, we are going to use today Slido as a service to collect questions and to have your feedback. So just before we start, at 3 p.m. exactly, can you already join slido.com and use the hashtag disinfo, or you can scan the QR code with your phone, which is much more easier. And please tell us where you are joining us from today. Brussels people, I see we are around 15 participants and growing. Berlin, Trier. Oh, I was there recently. Very beautiful town. The Rome of the North, if I remember well. Dublin. We still have a few people joining. And we're going to go to our second poll. And I would like to thank the team for that and to tell us in which sector you are working on. So welcome, everybody. My name is Alexandre Alaphilippe. I'm the Executive Director of EU DisinfoLab. As a disclaimer before we start, so this webinar is recorded, and the recording will be available on YouTube channel shortly after this session. And you can find also on our YouTube channel all of our previous webinars. As I mentioned, we're going to use Slido for Q&A, so please do not post your questions in the Q&A or in the chat of this Zoom session because we won't be able to see it. So use Slido to ask your questions, and we will answer it in the second part of the webinar. If it's the first time you're attending a EU DisinfoLab webinar, so we are a non-profit organization gathering knowledge and expertise on disinformation in Europe. And why do we organize these webinars? It's to give voice to experts, to give voice to our very awesome community and to help sharing knowledge and raise awareness around the great work that has been done by many of you. So thank you for your contribution and for accepting to share your expertise with peers. Today's webinar, and we can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about resilience. And we have been very lucky a few weeks ago, and you might have been with us to be welcome in Riga, in Latvia, to talk about disinformation during our annual conference Disinfo 2024. And especially we had a session around building Latvian resilience on disinformation. So looking at precise examples of what public authorities can do. So mission of countering disinformation requires for public authority to evolve in their missions, especially in educating key audiences on how disinformation spreads. And in 2022, the Latvian State Chancellery edited a guide for local public authorities on how they could counter disinformation. And additionally, a podcast on YouTube with regular guests has been launched. And today we're going to talk, and we are very, very happy to have with her Dr. Rihards Bambals. Welcome, Rihards. You are Director of the Strategic Communication at the State Chancellery of Latvia. Thanks for being with us today. You are responsible for coordinated Latvia communication with target audiences based on the whole of government approach, and you also coordinate efforts across different formats between governmental, non-governmental stakeholders to protect information integrity and to bolster psychological defenses against information influence operations. We're going to hear from you. We really like to see what Latvia has been doing on this for the past years. We'd like to thank the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Riga for their support in this webinar. And Rihards, you have the floor for 20-25 minutes, and then you will be able to take Q&A from the audience.
Thank you, Alexandre, for very kind words and introduction, and thanks everyone for joining to watch this live today, or who will be watching this on a replay later on. So I'll just quickly put on the presentation. It might take just a second. Yes, hopefully it can be seen well. Yes, I will go straight to the point, as we are here at the State Chancellery, or the government office, or the center of the government, to use the definition of the OECD. We work, mostly on coordinating strategic communication to make sure that the government and all the centers of power in Latvia speak with one voice, as much as it's possible in democracies with coalition governments. But also we coordinate efforts to protect the information integrity with other agencies across the government, also media regulators, cybersecurity institutions, intelligence community, and of course engaging a wider public in this. I'll be speaking about this in a minute. So throughout my presentation, there might be a few QR codes. So I promise you they do not lead you to any malware. They will be, however, leading you to potentially important or useful documents. In this case, this is a QR code that will lead you to our national concept on strategic communication and security of the information space that we designed here at the Center of Government in cooperation with more than 20 different bodies in 2022, and then it was approved by the government in January 2023. It's one of the first such documents in Europe. For us, it gave several things. First, it gave us clarity on definitions such as what is disinformation, what is misinformation, what is resilience, what is strategic communications, and other things. It also provides a public version of a threat assessment, risk assessment in the information domain, clarity on a joint vision for the government, where we want to be in 5 years' time, and what are our priorities. And then the doctrine is complemented by an actionable action plan with over 40 different things implemented by 26 different institutions according to different timelines. So here I will be not spilling any beans or reinventing the bike. I mean, the definition is very close to what we first saw with the European Democracy Action Plan in 2020, meaning the emphasis here on that distinguishes dis and misinformation is that in the case of disinformation, it's disseminated on a purpose, and that purpose might be to gain economic or political benefit. What is more dangerous or more harmful than just disinformation or just narratives is information influence operations. They are used in a more coordinated manner together with other means, not just means in information domain. And often it doesn't use just pure disinformation, just a pure fake. It might be partially true information. It's twisted, it's manipulated, and it's then used potentially in concert with other means to achieve certain purposes. Why? I will give you a short introduction of basically behind our thinking, behind our philosophy, and how we build resilience. And here are two numbers. The first number is $1.9 billion US annually. This is how much the Kremlin was spending 2 years ago through official channels on propaganda. And despite the sanctions, despite the pressure we are putting from the European Union side and the other partners are putting on Russia, more than a month ago, Russian authorities released their estimates for the budget, their budget numbers for 2025. Yes, they plan to increase their military spending by 30%, but they also plan to spend $1.47 billion US annually on a propaganda on their state-controlled media. I do not dare to call them real media. I call them propaganda channels, but still the effort is quite significant. And in our case, of course, we are mostly exposed to the pro-Kremlin and to some extent also Belarusian disinformation and influence campaigns here in Latvia. Russia's been planning this for quite some time. Here are colleagues from Lithuania, from Debunk EU, been collecting the numbers over the years. This is RT, one of the flagmans in the flagships in the Russian arsenal of disinformation. They receive around 25% of the total budget for propaganda, and they've been accumulating increasing their budget numbers significantly over the past 15 years. Russian disinformation, and it's quite common misperception that it only affects countries which have some proportion of the society that has who can speak Russian, or that are only in close proximity to Russia. This is actually an ecosystem, a picture of pro-Kremlin ecosystem, propaganda ecosystem from 2 years ago, and it shows there are many channels that are directly organized by special services. They are linked to Russian intelligence. Some are linked to Russian oligarchs. But that's probably not the most important part. Many of you who are experts in this know it very well. What's important is that the Russians are translating their content and adapting their content to all the bigger languages, starting from English to French to Spanish and others. And this has a significant effect in the larger scheme of disinformation laundering. Also, what does the Kremlin want to achieve by using disinformation? Here is an assessment from 2 intelligence agencies in Latvia. Not many countries do it. In Latvia, we do it. Intelligence agencies release annual reports. They're available, so not just in Latvian, but also in English. And here is one from the Constitutional Protection Bureau, and other is from the State Security Service. And both of them, in their yearly reports in 2023, are quite similar. That Russian influence measures, in the case of the Constitutional Protection Bureau, the aim is to discourage, to disrupt and damage, and to reduce international unity, divide societies, and to hinder the adoption of decisions that are unfavorable to Russia. And according to the State Security Service, it is to try to justify from the Russian side the invasion of Ukraine and the war crimes committed there, as well as to ensure that the Western countries, including Latvia, the societies in Western countries, including Latvia, lean towards the side of the aggressive state that delay support to Ukraine or eventually stop and ease the sanctions on Russia. Also, earlier this fall, in September, there was quite a lot of coverage in the media on the FBI investigations that also gave a lot of clarity on the Kremlin modus operandi by using the commercial entities, and the goals there have been to discredit the US, UK, NATO, also European Union. Across several European countries, also undermined rationality in continuing to support Ukraine, also to try to escalate internal tensions that are there in a society by using doppelganger domains that look like real media, including Delphi, which is one of the largest online platforms, online media across the Baltic states. It was also used in the doppelganger case, but also using buying fake comments, buying fake influencers, also real influencers, forging documents, and using other methods. It's also important that even though Latvia is part of the European Union and NATO already for 20 years, we are in relative safety, I'd say, and that's our estimation that Russia does not pose direct immediate military threats to us at the moment. However, it is the biggest threat to the NATO, as outlined in the NATO strategic concept of 2022. But what we know, and this is no secret, it's been published, and there have been warning signals earlier this year by bigger nations, by bigger intelligence agencies, that we shall be ready across Europe, not just across the Eastern flank, for different acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, and the disinformation influence campaigns to try to test our resilience, try to test our unity. and try to also eventually try to create some kind of chaos. When we go at the disinformation that's targeting Latvia, we hear from the central government, we monitor traditional social media in Latvia, but also narratives and methods employed by the Kremlin, by Russia and Belarus, and also how we are portrayed in other countries. If I have to summarize the main narratives, the main tendencies we see in 2024 and earlier this year, then I could categorize them across four major domains. First is to try to delay or stop support from Latvia to Ukraine. Second is to create anti-US, anti-European, or anti-Western at large sentiment within the society. The third is escalate internal tensions within the society between different economic groups, but between different ethnic groups. And the fourth major line of work is defamation of Latvia on the international stage. This is probably one of the oldest tricks and methods that Kremlin has been using and employing against Latvia. We've been experiencing this since 1997, 1998, even before Putin's time, even before accession to EU and NATO, when we experienced coordinated and orchestrated efforts to use both on-the-ground elements of trying to imitate and create protests and demonstrations in combination with efforts in the information domain, trying to portray Latvia as a Russophobic country with a rebirth of Nazism and a country not worthy accession to the European Union and NATO. The main narratives, you see them on the slides. It's on the Ukraine side. It's quite common, not just Latvia, but also to our neighboring countries all across the eastern flank of EU and NATO, that countries that have taken in a lot of Ukrainian war refugees ever since the full-scale war of aggression started. And since the day one, especially since March 2022, it's an ongoing narrative that Russians are trying to peddle, that Ukrainians are receiving some kind of, in any way, more aid or more support from the states that they are taking them in than the locals. Or the other direction is that trying to say that sanctions against Russia do not work, or that support Ukraine is worthless. And this is something we see all the time for the past nearly 1,000 days of the full-scale war of aggression. The other narratives are, yes, there are some more traditional ones, such as Russophobia, neo-Nazism, rebirth of Nazism, rewriting of history. We've been experiencing them for nearly 3 decades, ever since regaining the independence in the early 90s. And then there are some newer ones, more twisted ones that, for example, against the Green Deal, against the migrants, against the LGBTIQ community here in Latvia. What we did in Latvia in right after the full-scale war of aggression started, we cut the access to the pro-Kremlin propaganda channels. Our national media regulator did it. But what Russians did on their side, they transited to the social media channels, especially TikTok, Telegram. A lot of content is still freely available on a YouTube, if not in full, then in part of shorter videos, shorter clips, and even if they are closed, they are still coming back after some time. And also, of course, people who have been on audiences in Latvia who have been previously exposed to that, they are still trying to find ways around it by using VPN satellites. There are different applications available on a Google Play, on the App Store, that allow access to the pro-Kremlin propaganda channels. So there are still a lot of loopholes, despite efforts we're taking nationally, but also at the European Union level. Also, what we've seen is fake media websites, not always associated or attributable to the doppelganger, but they try to imitate media. Sometimes they're used in combination with paid ads on Facebook from stolen accounts, a problem that the platform unfortunately has not resolved for nearly over 2 years. We saw some action on this side also ahead of the European Parliament elections earlier this year. The bot campaigns earlier this year, we've seen the first efforts. So far, they've been quite ridiculous, and Latvia has not been the major target country so far. But we see that this is a trend that's picking up speed, and we shall be ready for more automated content, for more deepfakes and more AI in the future. And a lot of humor and memes, or so-called propaganda, is used from the Russian side, meaning that there are pages on the Facebook, pages on channels on other social media platforms that might be on a normal basis issuing just jokes, memes, and then with time or during particular events, they change that to a hardcore Russian propaganda. So people who are used to consuming that content on a daily or weekly basis, then they suddenly start being exposed to some hardcore Russian narratives. Also quite used method, and a lot of amplification also from Russian diplomatic accounts here in Latvia. What has been Latvia's response and the title of today's discussion, of course, is the efforts in Latvia's efforts in societal resilience building. There is a lot of good practice. Earlier this year, in March 2024, OECD released the first ever report on mis and disinformation in many of the OECD countries, including Latvia. We were not surprised to see Latvia's name mentioned on several accounts as good practice in the report, but we were surprised to see that there are not that many countries actually that have strategies and doctrines in place how to deal with this, and many countries many countries even don't yet have structures for coordinating efforts across the government to respond to disinformation from the government side, but also by engaging society. So we have that. It's all built on. We have developed a doctrine. I mentioned it earlier. I'll be going into detail in a minute, but our philosophy is based on a comprehensive state defense. In some countries, it's called total defense. We call it comprehensive state defense. It's essentially the same thing, but it means that it's not just, we're not leaving the defense of the country only to the military domain or only to the Ministry of Defense, but it requires the coordinated effort of all governmental bodies, but also engaging wider society. And this includes also defense of the information domain. So we have, since 2020, we have established structures, the unit I'm leading here at the State Chancellery, at the government office, where we monitor the information environment, where we fuse it with social media, where we mix insights from social media, from traditional media, from also opinion polls, and we provide this consolidated advice and analysis to our leaders for decision making. I already mentioned the doctrine on information integrity that we developed and approved by the government earlier last year, and we have also a lot of practical things that we developed for the society. Because if you were to stand up only alone, just a lone team here from the government office or only public sector, we will not stand a chance against that massive Russian pro-Kremlin disinformation I mentioned. They're spending nearly 1.5 billion US dollars annually. Our budgets, all budgets together, communication, media, are much smaller than that. And therefore, we provide tools. We develop tools for the society to equip society and arm society with practical knowledge, practical skills on how to resist and how to recognize manipulative methods, how to recognize disinformation themselves, and how the practical tips on what can be done at individual level. For example, a handbook on how to recognize and counter disinformation we developed 2 years ago. Also, not many people read the handbooks or have time for this. Therefore, we developed a platform, an online platform with podcasts, with analytical articles, and also with an option for citizen engagement in protection in the information environment. And of course, we did a lot of communication strategies and campaigns. We did a lot during COVID and when the full-scale war for aggression against Ukraine started from the Russian side. And also, we have this long-standing now, a long-term campaign on strategic communication, black and white, or Meltisbalta.lv. And we're active in international cooperation, and we have accumulated know-how in protecting elections ahead of in the previous election cycles and also earlier this year, since this is coordinated here from the center of the government. So our concept, and here is a QR code in the presentation where you can read the non-official translation to English. It's a public document. It's built on 3 pillars. How do we make sure that despite the geopolitical turbulence, Latvia will continue to ensure that our state, our democracy continues no matter what authoritarian regimes are directing our way in a coordinated way or on a daily basis. And here it's very essential to strengthen the people's sense of belonging to the state, to desire to defend the homeland, and also the psychological resilience to recognize and withstand the disinformation and manipulative attempts on people's lives on a daily basis. And this is built on 3 pillars. First is what we are doing here from the central government in coordination with other governmental bodies is ensuring that we have strong national strategic communication capabilities in place so we can monitor, so we can see the information environment, but so that we can also provide advice on how the communication should look, how it should be tailored with time. And therefore we do also a training and capacity building of other government agencies in Latvia. The second pillar is qualitative, independent, and secure media environment, meaning that we want strong media in Latvia that have strong embedded fact checking, that do not fall for Russian disinformation themselves, but also that government releases information formally or off the record to media on a regular basis, that we're not seeing journalists and media as someone we have to fight with, but they are allies in a larger picture when we have 2 authoritarian regimes right in our neighborhood. And then the third pillar is the societal resilience, which is probably the most important one in my view, where we engage with wider society, where we engage with academia and non-governmental sector, provide means for them to also chip in the protection of the information environment and telling the Latvia's narrative. This week, and actually the whole month, is the Patriotic Month in Latvia. We have several national days, including on the 18th of November, we have a our national day, the 106th anniversary. And this is the main narrative, our National Guard developed based on our narrative is Mana Latvija, Mana Atbildība, which is My Latvia, My Responsibility. It's very popular whenever if you are coming to Riga these days, you'd be seeing this on a billboards, you'd be seeing it on a mugs, on a coffee mug. So you'll be seeing this on people's laptops and stickers and so on and so forth. So it's something we try to make sure that this comprehensive state defense, this total defense strategy that includes information domain, that it's not just a concept, it's not just a paper, but it's actually something that people can associate with. So we want to make sure that when it comes to my area of responsibility is that we want to, our end state is, our goal is to make sure that everyone can tell Latvia's narrative and also participate in defense of Latvia against potential disinformation or defamation coming our way. We have several also good examples for citizen engagement. Probably you've seen that gamification and pre-bunking works well. These are not games invented by Latvia, but we have made Latvian adaptations, Latvian translations of a go-viral game, which was very effective, very widely used during the COVID pandemic, and also Harmony Square, which is a good thing to test and play ahead of elections that we did. We advertised this ahead of the 2022 general elections and also ahead of EP elections earlier this year. Essentially, the idea behind the game is that you don't have to download anything. You just go on a website, you play an online game for a bit more than 5 minutes. You put yourself in the shoes of potential adversary, potential manipulator, and you learn the tactics and methods that the manipulators use in their daily life to create chaos and achieve other ends. And by doing this, you learn how to recognize real disinformation in a real life, in a real social media, and it creates a resilience. The handbook I mentioned earlier, this is how it looks. So far, it's only available in Latvian, but it's also available in the digital version. Here's a QR code in the presentation, so you can take a look yourself. We plan to have a 2.0 version published by the end of the year, hopefully open source. That way we can translate it also to other languages. I think it's quite unique handbook. Before Latvia, I've seen similar examples in Sweden, in the United Kingdom, and it's inspired by those cases. But of course, we have localized it and we have tailored it to the Latvian needs. Essentially, it has 3 chapters. First chapter is how to recognize manipulative methods. So it accumulates knowledge on the pro-Kremlin methods they've been using for the past 3 decades. The second chapter is on how to counter, what can be done at individual, institutional, and state level to counter disinformation. And the third chapter is 51 most often used pro-Kremlin narratives against Latvia over the past 3 decades, and the scientific debunks made by university professors in areas of human rights, history, international affairs, and others. Initially, it was meant only for the public sector, but since the demand was quite high, we released also for the general public an online version, and it's also available in all public libraries in Latvia. And it's inspired by and based on this philosophy and principle of comprehensive state defense. Since not everyone has time to read books, even though it's not a very long book, but still, in 2023, a year ago, we launched long-term strategic communication campaign, Mounts Balta, or Black and White. It's an online page. Every one of you can take a look, go visit it. And it creates a whole ecosystem for people who want to arm themselves with practical knowledge. So it has interactive content with podcasts, with short tutorial videos, for example, 2 to 3 minute long videos on YouTube on how to report yourself disinformation to social media platform, how to distinguish that the image has been generated or video by an AI, or how to recognize a deepfake, and other things. And also articles. We have a monthly article on the main trends, a more public version of our work for general public on what have been the main trends observed in the information environment over the past month and other things. So I invite you to take a look. It's quite good. So, and yes, this is my last slide. We do a lot of work also with local governments, with municipalities, and make sure that the narratives, strategic communication narratives that the ministers and the cabinet ministers use and now also are known for the audiences in the local governments, municipality levels, because then they can transfer the knowledge to local regional media, to local non-governmental organizations, to local opinion leaders. And it's very essential to prepare for this and create these networks during relative peace times, because then they can be mobilized and used during a crisis or during a war if need be. So yes, there are many things we're doing on a campaign side, on a coordination side. I'm happy to talk more and take questions, but here I've put a point in my part of this presentation.
Thanks a lot, Rihards. I actually learned that so Balta means white, and
Yes.
Is it the origin of Baltic countries? Actually, is it the same etymology? I was curious. I was trying to find.
Yes, it's similar. It's similar. Yes.
Okay. Super interesting. So we have 20, 25 minutes for questions. I can see people are raising hands and using the Q&A in Zoom, but we're going to use the slido.com Q&A. So please log in using whether slido.com and the hashtag disinfo, or use it through the QR code and scan it to be able to ask your questions. While the questions are coming, a few things. So very interesting to see the handbook, and I think that's quite unique. I'm not sure I've seen other examples of such a handbook for public authorities and the general public. What has been the reaction? Because I guess you published it and you had, I guess, a tour presentations during two different local public authorities. What has been the feedback of the book?
The feedback, it's good. We see actually it's published on the government website. It's since we see the back end of the website, it's one of the most visited actually sites. So there's a lot of people who actually read the digital version. I mentioned that available nearly in all public libraries in Latvia. So whenever I go and people see and they know that I have basically done I have been editing the handbook myself. They're saying a lot of thanks. I think we could do a better job in advertising it. There's also a lot of not many people who know about the disinformation and about the disinformation handbook. But yes, generally it has been received very well, good reception, and we have also quantitative data on how many people have downloaded, visited this, and we see also the government officials using it occasionally, and also I think it's also a good source of inspiration for academia and general public.
Okay, we start to have questions coming in through Slido. You can go and ask a question there. How are you measuring success of these measures against disinformation? And do you have any quantitative, qualitative frameworks that you can share?
Yes, depends on the campaign. Of course, in the strategic communication, we have a set goals, set time framework, measurable targets. For example, when we did the online games, I showed the Go Viral, for example. It's very easy to measure it. The measurement of success is already embedded in the game itself. It's on how many people actually play the game, how many levels they reach, do they visit the WHO website at the end of the game. And to share actually with you, it was one of the most, if not the most, successful game launches in Latvia ever, because we used influencers in a late October, November 2021, when we still were going through a very hard lockdown at the time. There were not that many people actually taking up vaccination. And the game was, I think it was a good remedy because people were staying home. People were still asking questions about COVID, and this is what they were doing. They were playing a lot this game, and we could measure, the plays and the effect of this, and compare it also with other countries where the game's been launched. When it comes to the handbook, of course, it's a bit harder to measure. I mean, yes, we can see how many people download it, how many people reading it, how many people are media referencing it, but it doesn't necessarily say that people are becoming more resilient because of that. What we do is, however, is we do monitor the traditional social media in Latvia. We see also the pro-Kremlin narratives they've been using against us. And then we test those narratives in opinion polls with the general public, how many people actually trust that those things are true or not. And we measure these things over time with certain intervals. And then we can see whether our communication efforts are achieving the goals to change that perception, or shall we tailor them? Shall we change them? Shall we do something differently? And I think this is a way how to, yes, combine the things you have. There's analytical tools, online tools, hardware tools. There's a lot of human effort in this, but also you combine it with sociology and opinion polls and in-depth interviews, and to see whether people actually believe it, and then start debunking and working around them this way. So this is how we also measure whether we have And also the one of the measures is, of course, and the most important currency for us as a government is the trust in the government institutions, and the trust in the communication, and trust in particularly in communication about the priorities such as Russia's war on Ukraine, and this is also one of the measurements we use against the baseline and how it changes over time. I see there are other questions coming in. Do you have some
Yeah,
special courses?
many questions. Just to stay on this because it's
Yeah,
very interesting. Because you mentioned that a lot of polling, so qualitative, quantitative measurements, how much of this part of monitoring and evaluation of your policies is being part of the project itself? Is it like designed from the start? Is it coming afterwards? I think that might be very relevant for some other public authorities that would like to understand how you've put in place this kind of monitoring and evaluation process.
Yes, of course. I mean, we definitely need evaluation from the outset, but there are some things have to be also uh, the things I mentioned about the proclaimed narratives and how they see traction or no traction in Latvian society. They actually have to be monitored over the time span of several years, because they do not change their perception of people immediately. Initially, we've been making a lot of jokes about the COVID disinformation, about the COVID conspiracies, also about the disinformation we saw initially coming from Russia when the support to Ukraine was super high in the society. But then it takes effect with time. In 2 years' time, we see that actually some narratives see traction, and more people start believing them. So yes, some of them are linked directly with some campaigns. Campaigns, of course, have a particular time frame over a time span of weeks and months, but some things have to be also monitored beyond one particular campaign or one particular effort. So yes, it's actually both. It's some things that are embedded and linked only with a particular campaign, and some are more long-standing.
Okay. There was a question from Reka. Do you have special courses in the academia in kind of civil society resilience building? Is academic part of the plan?
Unfortunately, no. We don't have a special course for the academic sector. However, I have never said no to people who are writing, I don't know, master thesis, PhDs, who need someone for an interview on this. And also, I'm an occasional also lecturer, a guest lecturer to schools and high schools and universities whenever I'm invited, but not like a special course run by the government.
So this is an invitation to invite you for actual academic work. One of the things you mentioned was also the kind of building media ecosystem and resilient media ecosystem. So a question about the global collapses traditional news media outlets, and do you have any elements? Could you share how this affects efforts to build a resilient information space if you have a collapse and more fragile economy and revenue streams for mainstream medias?
Yes, of course, with the technology, AI coming in, but the social media consumption increasing on a yearly basis, we will also measure and monitor that because we want to see where our audience is living and where are they, how much they are consuming traditional media versus particular tech platforms. Of course, this is an issue. Latvia is exposed to the same challenges as other European Union countries, maybe even more so because we have a much smaller population, 1.9 million people. It's a very small media market. Media have to struggle a lot, especially newspapers in the regions. It's really a challenge for many of them. We've seen already news earlier this year that some newspapers had to close because of not finding ways to survive economically, and I'm actually sure that we might be seeing more newspapers, more outlets like this disappearing in the next few years unless they go through digitalization, unless they go through diversifying their revenue streams, unless they combine forces with other outlets. So yeah, it's quite hard to have a proper media as a business in such small economy, and we are probably more affected than larger nations to this end. But we see that from the state side that we definitely need to support media. As I said, this is one of my goals as a communicator whenever I go and talk with prime ministers and cabinet ministers and other high-level officials, is that all I'm saying is that most of our problems and the bad press come from actually high-level officials not wanting to disclose information in a timely manner to journalists, and then there's never a vacuum in the information environment. There's always rumors, there's always things that will be written or said on the social media or traditional media, and we have to fill that space with our own narrative. Therefore, proactive approach, on the record, off the record briefings on a regular basis, especially on essential and sensitive topics. The journalist is something we are advocating, at least from my team's side, on a regular basis when I work.
Thank you. Question from Pavlo. What specific strategies have been most effective in countering disinformation targeting the Latvian public on social media platforms?
Depends. It really depends on a case by case. For example, the one particular case that comes to my mind is a massive bombing threats that we saw a year ago in October 2023. We saw that it is actually no real bomb threats. With the terrorist threat level in Latvia is low. But what we saw is the rumors spreading rapidly and the messages, the emails and hundreds being sent to the kindergartens and schools and universities that they will be bombed, that there might be some attacks planned on those on a children and on a pupil in the school system. And of course, what our state police reacted very, very fast with messaging that the terrorist level is low, that people should stay calm, that it's actually just a fake. It's only something in an information domain, but it not necessarily calm people down. So what we did is we also collaborated with influencers, with not like traditional influencers or like doing, I don't know, some fitness products or some beauty products, or travel, but influencers that are like opinion leaders and talk about politics, about socioeconomic issues, and influencers like that. And we gave the message to them. We also to tell to their audiences to use them as trusted messengers, and we empowered them with this in a way. And they also helped us to collect back the feedback from the questions that people are still asking, that are still not answered by the state authorities, by the police or others. And this helped us a lot to tailor the communication, to release more information after that, to make it more easy digestible for people, and then it reassured it. So I think, and I think this case is a good best practice, how we engaged engaged audiences that are beyond the traditional audiences that are not reading or exposed to the government press releases or official announcements, but that are following people and trusted messengers that we can use as the government.
How do you work on active trust building? I'll come back to influencers later. We have another question on that, but like, how do you work on active trust building and productive narrative promotion? And there, a question also linked, like, how do you choose appropriate, powerful, and unifying narratives? Just like, how do you build on the trust side, but also how do you identify positive narratives that are powerful and unifying?
Yes, we have developed narratives, a system of narratives already 8 years ago in Latvia. Right after or during it started work during 2015 during the Latvia's presidency of the EU Council. It's continued also in 2016, and we developed the narrative: what Latvia is, what are the messages, meta narratives that unifies us as a nation, because we are very diverse, people from rural areas, from the capital, different ethnic groups, different linguistic groups, different economic groups, and so on and so forth. And this was prepared ahead of the Latvia's centennial that we had the celebrations in 2018, and then based on the best practice, based on the ways how we used and what worked and what didn't work during the centennial celebration, used narratives. Then we adapted them with the experience we had during the COVID, during the first year with full-scale war of aggression, with the more long-term political strategy and needs from our political elites, and we have now tailored and released the narrative to our network of communicators in Latvia, so they can tell Latvia's narrative, and it's not used only by political leaders, or not just from the central government, but also people in the municipalities can tell Latvia's narrative. People in the state police, people in independent governmental institutions like Central Election Authority or Corruption Prevention Combating Bureau, and others can also be part of that wider network of communicators. So yes, and then the campaigns and the other communication activities are, we invite them to first integrate one of those 5 meta narratives in their yearly communication planning, and also to think about the priority audiences, because we have, of course, we have segmented the society. We see which societal groups have lesser sense of belonging or more fragile sense of belonging to the state, for whom's hearts and minds we shall be fighting more actively, and therefore we invite them also to think about how they will tailor their communication efforts to the specific needs of specific target audiences that we have segmented.
About influencers, are influencers also at risk of spreading disinformation, and how do you think this should be addressed?
Of course, the short answer is yes, they are exposed to disinformation. Of course, they're also spreading disinformation, and there is no one-size-fits-all strategy. We work with influencers, not just us, but many ministries and governmental institutions work with influencers that are closer to their area of political competency, so health, environment, defense, and so on and so forth. Again, very similar approach to as with media editors and journalists. A lot of off-the-record briefings, meetings in person, those personal events is actually to raise awareness about the geopolitical challenges, about potential risks, about thinking twice before spreading, thinking carefully about the collaborations they take, and yes, so there's still a lot of work to be done. We are far from perfect. I definitely don't want to say that we have some good cases. We also have, of course, some bad experience to this end, as everyone, and we learn from both of that, both from best practice, but also from the worst cases that we've had in the past. But influencers are here to stay, and with TikTok and Snapchat generation, and that are less and less using or comparing what they see on those platforms with the actual news, with the actual traditional media, we will have no other option than actually collaborating with people to whom they trust and to whose content they actually are consuming on a daily basis.
Thank you. We also have, so I'm grouping, we have a series of questions like, how do you manage a situation when your political leader seems to be working with the Kremlin and spread the Russian narratives? Question from Rowan says also that she's based in the United States, but we have a similar question from Reka also. Do you think your approach would work in countries where people don't have much trust in the government, which is also something that is happening, for instance, the United States, and we know there are traditionally high less trust in government and public authorities in the US. So how do you think this approach could work? Whether A, political leadership is actually inclined to go there, so is civil society resilient that you build enough to counter this? And B, how do you work if there is little trust already on top of that?
On the first question, as I'm certain that in the current coalition government that we have do not have any Kremlin sympathizers. The same goes with other power centers such as the president or the speaker of the parliament and particular parliamentary commissions. It's actually, we have had over the past 3 decades several coalition governments. All of them have had the same goal shared. Whoever is, no matter who is leading the coalition, no matter who is prime minister, no matter who is president of the country, all of them have been pro-European, strong supporters of European Union and NATO. And I do not see any changes in either in the immediate future nor more distant future to this. And it doesn't mean that we do not vote people in the parliament the same way as it happens with the European Parliament and other national parliaments. Yes, there might be people who are openly or covertly sympathizing with the Kremlin, with Putin's policies, and we work around them, but they do not have actually real influence. They are not part of the decision-making process, and unfortunately, it's truth. It's something that more and more countries in Europe unfortunately are experiencing. That there will be some people in the parliaments who might be against support Ukraine, more leaning towards Russia. As surprising yes, it is to me, and I personally cannot understand those people's positions, but I realize that it's a reality. On the second question on whether it works in the countries with lower trust in the government, I wouldn't say that we have the highest trust in the government. No, we don't. But therefore, actually, it's essential to work through other trusted messengers, through other channels. So people might not be trusting all the political leaders or all the political parties, but they might be trusting media, they might be trusting influencers, they might be trusting other opinion leaders. So we make sure that at the end of the day, we achieve that behavioral and change if need be, and that we want to see here from the center of government through different channels, through different means. So we make sure that those government messaging and narratives are reached down to the lower levels through different channels, if not necessarily always directly from the government press releases or from the government social media accounts. We are very realistic towards this. We don't have the highest always highest ratings, but therefore we do again, as I said, opinion polls. We measure trust in a very detailed way. We see which institutions, which channels are more used, which are more trusted, and we work from there. So
Thank you, Rihards.
so the short answer is yes, it can be replicated in countries.
We have a few other questions. Unfortunately, it is time. So I'm going to stop with this one. Just like, is there any ways that people that could have asked their questions can contact you? Can you share any email address, or can we pass on if you're sending an email to EU DisinfoLab, pass on to us, or maybe on LinkedIn? Are there any ways that people can contact you to continue this conversation? I'm pretty sure many people have questions.
Yes, please reach out to me I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on X, I'm also on Facebook, on Threads, and yes, you can also reach me through an email. I will pass it to Alexandre, and I guess Alexandre can then send it over to the participants of today's webinar. And many thanks for inviting me. It was very challenging questions, very interesting questions. So made me think a lot. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Rihards, and thank you all the attendees today. We have regular webinars coming in, and I'm pretty sure, yes, we have 2 weeks from now on a completely different topic, looking at FIMI resilience through model of practices, and we're going to talk with Ben Graham-Jones from Doublethink Lab, and we're going to go to Taiwan. So very much different mood and region to talk about FIMI resilience. You can already receive an email for registering to this webinar, which will take place on the 20th of November. Reminder, this recording of this webinar will be on our YouTube channel very, very soon. And you can also go to the previous webinars that we did there. This webinar has been done thanks to the support of the German embassy in Riga. So thank again to their support. Just a few things. We have also our newsletter, which is coming every 2 weeks. Feel free to register to our newsletter and subscribe. We want to mention also that there are growing concerns about the role of X in contributing into spreading disinformation globally, and moreover since the past days. And there are new terms of services that will start to apply tomorrow. We might stop being active on that platform. So please make sure, if you want to follow us on other platforms. We are also, DisinfoLab has a Blue Sky account, has a Mastodon account. We have a LinkedIn account, but we might not be very active on X very, very soon. Also, after this webinar, you receive a questionnaire to rate the webinar and suggest topics. We're always eager to have more topics. If you are a company and you would like to know more about sponsored webinars, you can also get in touch with us. Thanks a lot. Thanks again, Rihards, and see you very soon, online or offline. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks so much. Goodbye.